Wow, I'm so excited to share this episode with you. I just had a conversation with Rory Walkom. She is a certified medium and master teacher through the Trilogy Institute in Lilydale, New York. She runs the Medium School, which is an online mediumship and intuitive development school. So, Rory totally believes that we are all innately capable of mediumship and connecting to our intuition. So, in this episode, she shares tips for you. So, if you're listening and you're like, I wish I was a medium, but I'm not, or I wish I could connect with my soul and know what my soul is saying, or my spirit guides or past loved ones, but that's just not me. Well, she believes that is you and you can do it. And she shares some amazing tips on how. And that is what her mediumship school is all about and helping you connect to your intuition. So I'm so excited to share this with you and welcome Rory to the podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Holly.
Yeah, I feel like this has kind of been a bit of a long time coming because we connected on Instagram about a year ago. And yeah, and now here we are a year later and you're here. It's great.
Meant to be. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So first off, if you could perhaps tell people a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got to where you are, how your mediumship skills opened up, and was it always the case, or what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so I'm Rory Walkom. I'm the owner of the Medium School, and I am such a believer that we all have these abilities. Because for me, it is not something I was tuned into for so much of my life. And it wasn't until my dad passed fairly suddenly, right before my wedding, that I had all the reasons in the world to want to be able to tune in without knowing if I could, without knowing how, without even knowing that he was still living on for sure and that it was even possible. And as I started to open up bit by bit, I started to remember all the times I had sensed spirit when I was younger, all the times I had, seen my grandpa who I'd never met who passed before I was born, or all the times where I could feel the presence of different spirits around me wherever I went that didn't mean much until I started to open up again and remembered all those experiences I had. And that is something I find with my students again and again, that whatever happens in their life to awaken them, whether it's a death of a close loved one like me, whether it's, something traumatic, a job change, different things like that, when that moment arises where they have that need to connect, they start remembering all the ways they were already connected in life. And like me, most of us, we've just got to close it down to sort of survive in this world, to fit in. No one else, I know for me growing up, no one else understood it, no one else believed in it, no one else saw it. So that was an easy reason for me to close down. So much of what I do as a teacher is helping each and every one of my students to bring out their innate abilities, to remember how innately connected they are. Because I know I was surprised when I first started opening up just to connect with my dad, how all of a sudden I could do it for others. I could feel not just my dad's energy around, but I could feel, the person beside me, dad in spirit, and I could feel my husband's grandparents in spirit, and I could feel and see and hear and know so much about these energies that I never thought was possible. So I do mediumship readings, but for me, teaching, helping others to open up is such a passion because it changed my life completely.
Wow. Yeah. So, is this kind of what you're doing full time now, your school and mediumship readings? And so, can I ask what you did before you realized you had these gifts?
Yeah, so completely different. I thought I was working my dream job. I was actually a manager at MAC Cosmetics. So I got to run a business. I got to be a makeup artist. I had that creative side, which I loved, but my health was horrible. And it wasn't until my dad passed where I realized I can't do this anymore. I am so depleted. I am working and going to bed and doing nothing else just to try to maintain this life that I thought I wanted. And that was one of the first lessons that my dad supported me with once I started opening up is you don't have to work your life away. He might have been that example to show that, hard work and productivity were so important. But I love on the other side, they have greater awarenesses. And he was really able to help coach me of it's okay to leave that job. It's okay to not necessarily know where you're headed, but you know you're going in this arena. It's okay to sort of leave it behind, take care of yourself for once in your life. And I know I wouldn't be doing this today without that support.
Wow, that is so cool. So, how long has it been since your dad passed away?
So it's been almost 10 years, and I've been doing this really the year after he passed was when I really first started developing. So I've been doing it since then. And I was lucky. I did my training, or a good amount of my mediumship training in Lilydale, New York, with my beautiful mentor, Patricia Price, who used to be a registered medium there. And when I was certified as a medium with her, one of the first things she said was, well, you're going to teach for me now, right? And it was one of those things I felt such a calling to teach others, but it was another sort of person stepping up to support me to really get me on track where I want to be, because that is such a passion for me. I'm not somebody who, only does mediumship readings and wants to, give those messages for others. I want others to be able to get them for themselves. And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. That's how I feel about the dream work as well, which is why it's like the same thing. It's like I don't want to interpret your dreams for you. I want you to be empowered to learn what your own connection is like so you can go into the dream world and get your own guidance from your intuition, your higher self, and your guides yourself. So I love that you're all about
We
empowering
all
others.
have that within us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's really interesting you say, you believe everybody has like mediumship gifts. And I believe that everybody has, their own kind of form of intuitive gifts, whether it's mediumship or clairvoyance, claircognizance, clairsentience, whatever it might be. And like, I would never really consider myself a medium, but I'm listening to you talk and how you were saying, when you were a child, you could sense spirit, you kind of feel these things. And I was just kind of like flashing back to my own childhood and what I would sense and feel. And I never saw, like, I know there's some people who see, and because I never saw, I never considered myself in the category of. And so I always considered myself a muggle until literally like 2017, 2018, when all this dream stuff awoken for me. And so I'm just kind of bringing this up because I think there's probably a lot of people who are listening who are just like, oh, these people can do these things. And I don't know, maybe I had like a little inkling, but like maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, for those people who are listening out there who doubt that they have the ability to sense or connect or receive messages, maybe because when I was a kid, I could sense things at night. Like that was my thing, was like at night. And I could never fall asleep. Like I had the worst time trying to fall asleep. Drove my mom crazy because I'd always be like, I can't sleep. There's like, I hear all these sounds and blah, blah, blah. Everything's freaking me out. And I think that's kind of why I shut down my gifts, is because it was like, it was just creepy to me because I couldn't understand it. And so as a child, I thought, maybe I just have this overactive imagination. I just need to go to sleep. I'm being annoying. Like, so maybe if you could shed some light for others who might have a similar history and experience or thought pattern around that, their dialogue to themselves is like, no, I don't have any gifts. I'm just like imagining things or.
I'm so glad you asked this. And I relate so much to that as a child. I would say there's two big reasons that a lot of us don't think we have these abilities. And to me, one of the first ones I really noticed just being in this spiritual development arena is how the practitioners, how mediums, psychics, intuitives, how they talk about it. And the idea that they will say, I'm gifted, or I was born a clairvoyant, or, different things like that, I think can be helpful for their own confidence, but I think it can be really hurtful to the other people who can't relate with that and think, oh, I'm not gifted. And to me, that is absolutely not the case. We are all born with these abilities, and some of us have been using them since we were born, but most of us, me included, have not been. And that does not mean that they aren't there. To me, when I'm working with my mediumship students, one of the things we really focus on in development is connecting to our own soul and letting that energy grow and expand in this life. And to me, that is proof that we all have mediumship abilities. because we have a soul within us. We have that energetic being that when our bodies pass, it continues to live on. And that energetic being is connected to all that is. So mediumship isn't just connecting to past loved ones, it certainly can be, but it's connecting to any energies outside of this world. So spirit guides, right? Angels, the ascended masters, gods and goddesses, these different energies, anything that isn't physical that we can connect in one way or another is mediumship. And the idea that some people are just born with this ability, to me, that's just ego. We all have it built in. Some of us just have to develop it. And I think the other part of that is it looks different for everyone. So I completely relate with you in saying, when you were a kid, you didn't see spirit much. I had very few occasions when I saw them. And I would say it was more when I was a teenager when that clairvoyance started. And then I closed it down pretty quick out of fear, which is a very common reason we close and block off. But just because some people see spirit since they were a child does not mean they are more gifted than someone else who's felt them every single moment since they were a child and then closed off, right? Or somebody who had heard spirit or just knew they were around, right? And to me, when I'm working with my students, they all have different strengths in all of these, right? Some people will have that sight as more of a strength, and some people will have the feeling and the knowing. I know for me, when I first started opening up again, the sight was not strong at all. I had blocked that out of fear. I had seen too many spirits around as a teenager that really scared me. So that was something that I was not ready to open up, but I could really feel my dad's presence. And the more I learned to trust that, the more I realized I was doing it for other people. And I often find one of the big breaking points for a lot of people where they start realizing they have these gifts is when they're able to sort of connect for someone else. I know for me, one of the most important moments, I was in a yoga class and we were doing the meditation at the end, and I could just feel, I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, I didn't know. There was no other sensing other than a feeling of a spirit like my dad that wasn't my dad. And I kept almost feeling sort of pulled to the person beside me. So I did what I suggest none of my students do. I went to the lady and said, "Hey, is your dad passed?" Not asking permission, not respecting her boundaries at all. I'd never do that again. But it was that moment that I needed. I knew her dad was helping me in that moment because she turned to me and said, "Yep, he's passed and he's around me all the time." And it was that moment where I no longer felt like, oh, I could be making this up because I'm not seeing it, I'm just feeling it. It could be so easy for this to just be imagination and me wanting to sense my dad, sensing an energy like my dad that wasn't my dad. And for the person that I was pulled to say, yeah, my dad's around, I knew I was sensing him. I know for me, that was such a turning point where I no longer doubted it every time. Not to say there weren't moments, but I find that with so many of my students, the second they get confirmation from somebody else, their own internal experience doesn't seem so imaginative anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. It's so fascinating because, yeah, I think you're bang on with, how people hear other people talk about their gifts. Like, oh, I was born with this. I've always known this. I've always been able to. And then it does kind of bring down everybody else's um, confidence in that sense of like connecting with their higher selves or other spirits. And so it becomes easy to just shut that off.
Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
makes it feel like it's either something you have or you don't have. And I'm like, that is BS. We all have it. Some of us just need more time to develop it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for some people it comes down to timing in their life too. That's definitely what it was for me. It was like it wasn't like I wasn't ready until a certain point. And so that has a lot to do with it too. For me, anyway. And I think, yeah, for other people, it just depends on where you're at in your journey.
I would not be sitting here doing any of this without my dad passing, without having my biggest supporter in life being my biggest supporter in the afterlife to help me open up to this world.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was thinking when you were saying, because your dad has been so instrumental in bringing these gifts back out, do you think that um, for you, because you were so familiar with his energy before he passed, it was easy for you to recognize his energy when he came to you afterwards? Whereas, like, for me, I never really experienced much death. And so
Mhm.
for me, when I felt spirit, it was just very foreign. So it was like, oh, this could be my imagination, right? The first um, spirit that I can like consciously really recognize was actually my grandma. And my grandma passed when I was like, I think like 2 or 3, but I always kind of could sense her. And then when I was in my like troubled late teen, early 20 years, I really sensed her and she would come to me in my dreams. And that was like very prominent. But I didn't have her experience of her energy in like a conscious or like daily or weekly interaction in this physical world. So it was kind of hard for me at first. Do you think that maybe that could be something that people get hung up on too in tapping in?
Totally. And I do know that is something that has really helped me, knowing that feeling my dad's presence was one of my strengths. I often relate it to when I was a young girl and he'd be working late at night and I would just know when he'd get home because I could feel the shift in energy in our house. We had a big house. My room was at the back of the house. You couldn't hear him come in. You couldn't hear it, right? But I could just feel his energy. I could feel, if I was supposed to be sleeping, but like you, I didn't sleep well as a kid. I was going to stay up as late as I could. So, I'd have my eyes closed, supposed to be sleeping in bed, and I could just feel him sort of in the hallway coming to my door, to say goodnight and all of that. And when he passed, the ability to recognize that presence in the same way when I was a kid was definitely a strike for me. But that doesn't mean that those who don't have somebody close like that in the spirit world can't sense spirit. Sometimes it's just a little bit harder to trust because you don't have that sort of close connection, right? And that's why I said oftentimes having the confirmation from somebody else, whether it's you're at a mediumship development circle and, just practicing doing readings for someone else and they can say, oh my gosh, yes, that is my grandma or that is my mom or that is my sister or whoever it is, can really help us have perspective on everything that we're getting. So that if this one thing can be confirmed by somebody else, then maybe, that feeling that I'm getting of my grandma or that sign that I'm getting here, or when she's showing up in my dreams, maybe the rest of that stuff isn't so imaginatory, isn't so, isn't made up as it might feel like it is, right?
So, do you have maybe a quick few tips for people, like little exercises people can do to start sensing spirit and tuning into spirit?
Totally. One of my favorite exercises to do, and for mediumship development, will often work with the idea of sitting in the power. And we could talk an entire episode about this, but it's a very important mediumship development exercise where the first half you go into meditation and you envision your soul energy. So it might be something you see as a light inside of you. It might be something you feel. It might be something you just know. For a lot of people, this is right in the heart center, but it can vary. And the idea is with the first half of this meditation is you're tuning into that soul energy and letting it grow and expand. So letting that soul energy fill up your whole body and then fill up your whole aura and then fill up your whole house and your city and your country and the world and the universe bit by bit. And I know I mentioned before that idea of letting your soul energy expand. That can be so, so important because mediumship is energetic work, right? The more we connect with our energy, the stronger of a connection we're going to have with spirit. So, sitting in meditation, connecting to that inner light, letting it expand out. Now, in mediumship development, we will often do the second part of this meditation in many ways. But one of the things I would greatly suggest is once you feel or see or just know that your energy is expanded out, calling in one spirit energy just so you can sense their presence. And this may be a past loved one that you're close to. It might be your grandma for you. But for those of us who don't have someone who's passed that we would recognize, it might just be calling in a spirit guide of the highest and best. And you don't even have to know who they are. You can just ask for a spirit guide to step in. And the idea with this exercise is to just allow yourself to notice any signs of their presence. It might be something you see in your mind's eye. For me, it's something I feel. I might feel it on one side of the body. I might feel tingling. I might feel heat or cool. I might feel sort of just the air around me changing. For other people, it's a hearing thing where they might start to hear, whooshes or ringing or different things like that. And for others, it's just a knowing that this presence is with them. Whatever you pick up on, no matter how subtle it is, you want to say, thank you. I feel your presence. I recognize your presence. And the more you do this, what I love to do is ask this energy to step in, notice how I can recognize their presence, and then ask them to step out so I can feel the difference with their energy leaving. And then I ask them to step back in. And this is something I do with my mediumship students. So they really get familiar with what it feels like to have that spirit connection, how they can recognize that it's there every time. And the idea is you're not worrying about getting a million messages from them. You're not worried about having them answer questions or giving guidance or anything like that. It's just expanding your energy out to make room for you to sense them and calling in one particular spirit and just noticing any signs of their presence. The more you can practice this, the easier it's going to be to recognize any spirit presence.
Ooh, I love that. I'm going to try that too. That makes sense. I like how you ask them to like leave and then come back and just like practice feeling that. I think, yeah, I think that's a really powerful experience. So
And
have
I
you,
find with a lot of students, sorry, I was just going to
no,
say,
no,
I
go
find
ahead.
with
Go
a
ahead.
lot of students, they don't even notice what they're picking up on until they ask the spirit to step out a few times and they feel it shift, right? And
Mm,
that's one really common experience. Going back to the idea of we think spirit communication should look one way, we should see them, it should be exactly like people talk about or in the movies, but it's so much more subtle than that,
mm-hmm.
right? And the idea of calling them in, letting them step out, we're able to start tuning into all those little subtle signs that we can so easily write off as coincidence or something in our physical environment or imagination. And the more you practice it, the more you're able to recognize that true spirit connection and that you're not making it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel like in this day and age, we're bombarded with so much energy all the time. We, it's like natural to just kind of have a bit of a guard up so we can just be ourselves. If you're like a highly empathic person, you're going to be like constantly feeling like quote unquote too much in a way, and you wouldn't even be able to function. So, how do you help people kind of shed the noise so they can sense and feel with their soul?
I think that's another huge reason that so many of us shut down our abilities, right? If you're somebody who felt like you were more sensitive as a child and around puberty, teenage years, you really felt yourself closing down, it's probably because the energies were too much for you, right? And finding ways to be able to open up, but set those boundaries and manage it so that it's not exhausting is half the work of development, right? Boundaries is such a huge thing. So for developing mediums who are really looking at developing that connection more, one of the things I say is you're going to start opening up. Spirits are going to know that you're open and they're going to start showing up all the time. And it's up to you whether you want to be that person who, anytime they show up, you're going to communicate, you're going to talk because it feels like you should be open all the time. I was that way for too many years and not anymore. Or are you that kind of medium who knows you're going to set aside time, whether it's in meditation, whether it's in a circle, whether it's in wherever you can make time to open up to spirit intentionally while you're in that a good high vibration to do good healing mediumship work for yourself or others. And any other time spirits show up the rest of the time, you might acknowledge, you might recognize that you would be able to recognize their presence, but not just tune into them willy nilly.
Mm-hmm.
And for some mediums, this is setting, office hours of, anytime after 9 p.m., I'm not open, but, from 9 a.m. on, I'll be open. If something's important, you can show up. For me, it's, not necessarily office hours like that for spirit. It's, every day or once a week or whenever I have time, I'm going to tune in and see what spirits need to come forward, see what messages need to come forward. And, I do readings and the spirits might show up before then, but I'm not going to tune into them until it's that time when I'm in a reading because it's unhealthy for me to just be open all the time. And I found it's the same way, when I started coming out to family and friends, it was always sort of what message does spirit have for me now? And what do they want to say about this? And I used to just be open all the time and say, oh, yeah, they're saying this and they're saying this. And then I would leave being exhausted and feeling like I'm just in this serving mode and I'm not taking care of myself. So it was more intentional than anything. It wasn't that I needed to do specific practices, but to just set the intention that I'm not open all the time. I know I've got specific moments where I'm going to tune in and I can let that spirit connection grow. But other than that, it is simply depleting and unhealthy for me and most mediums to just be that open, resonant energy the rest of the time. And for me, that also means that if there's any spirit around that does not feel loving or positive, that it is something that I recognize now. I didn't in the past. I wish I knew this as a child. I wish I knew this as a teenager, but I recognize my power now that if I don't want them around, regardless of who they say they are, regardless of how powerful they say they are, or different things like that, I can kick them out of my home. I can kick them out of my room. I can kick them out of my energy. I can set that boundary that I do not need to perceive them at all if it does not feel loving or helpful. And I even had a moment like that with my grandfather in spirit, who passed before I was born, but I'd always sensed around. When I first started opening up, he was one who said, okay, I'm going to help. And one night I got up in the middle of the night and I just saw his face. It was one of the most sort of clear apparitions I'd ever seen, but it was just his face sort of floating in the hall towards me. And it scared the crap out of me. I knew it was my grandfather, but
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the scariest things to
Yeah.
just see this disembodied face just floating towards me. And it was one of those moments where I realized I can just be like, hey, cut that out. Like, that is scaring me. I know you want to help, but that is not it. Right. And
Yeah.
as soon as I did that, it was gone. And I could still feel his energy around. But it was such a learning point for me to say, even if it is a loving spirit, even if it's one that's connected to me that I want to continue to build a connection with, I don't have to perceive it in a way that scares me. And I think really setting boundaries around when you connect to spirit, but also how you connect to spirit. If you were somebody that when you start opening up, you start feeling like I feel everything they felt in the physical, and that's overwhelming, you can tell them, hey, I don't want to do that. Show it to me in this way, or you can say, give me symbols, or whatever it is that you want, instead of overwhelming physical stimulus, but really sort of knowing that you have control over your spirit encounters. You have control over your interactions with them, and sort of having times where you can open up, not be open all the time, but also where you can redirect the ways they are showing up in a way that reduces your fear is one of the most important things you can do, because true mediumship is done in a really high vibration, in a really uplifted, good feeling place. That is the energy of our past loved ones in the spirit world, in heaven, whatever you want to call it. It is as perfect as we could want it to be. And when we want to connect with their energies, almost always it's going to be easier when we're in a good feeling, uplifted place. So for me, I will usually meditate before I connect, because that's a really easy way for me to get there most days. Not every day, but most days. The more you are in that high vibe energy, the closer connection you will have to spirit. Not saying you can't not be in a lower vibration. We're in human bodies, it's going to happen. But when you want to connect, the more you're able to be at that high vibration, the stronger of a connection you're going to have, the closer you're going to feel to them. And the more fear that pops up in your development, the more you need to look at ways to not receive in that way, not block down fully, but redirect the energy in a way that doesn't cause fear for you, so that you can continue to open up and not be overwhelmed. And I think those are some really important things specifically for mediumship development, but really whatever you're developing in the spiritual arena, taking care of your physical self is so important. right? We often think of, if I'm working on intuitive development or mediumship development or, working with my dreams and sort of spiritual development, that it's just energy and spiritual that we're working on. But that's not the case. And I know that was one of my big lessons after my dad helped me move away from a job that I thought was a dream job, but I was exhausting myself of not continuing those patterns in a new job, right? Even though this is so much more my passion and my purpose, I have had so many opportunities to really look at what I need to do to take care of myself physically, mentally, emotionally, and not just spiritually. And sometimes that's setting boundaries with people in your life, right? Just as you would with spirit. Sometimes that's realizing that the mall is overwhelming, so I can go in to grab one thing, but it's just not the place for me to be the rest of the time, right? And really tuning into every part of you, not just the spiritual, not just the energetic, tuning into your emotions, tuning into your mind, tuning into your body, and noticing how you can be in the most alignment with who you are. I think it's easier said than done. It's a practice, but the more we take care of ourselves fully, the easier this kind of work is. And to be honest, I think the easier life is.
Yeah, I think you shared some really great insights and tips, or ones that I'm going to take away too. So thank you for that. I wanted to talk a little bit about past lives, because you are also a past life regressionist. So when you do sessions, do you do sessions with people and you do past life regression with them? Is that what that means that you do?
Yes, I do. So I
Okay.
started developing my mediumship first. And it was something that the more I did sessions, the more I tuned in for people, the more this idea of past lives kept popping up. And it was interesting, I grew up Christian, nothing that was ever talked about in my family, right? It was this: you have one body and you go to the afterlife and that's it, right? Hopefully it's the good afterlife, but you're there for the rest of time, right? And yet, being taught that as a child, it was always something that when I heard about, whether it was Lisa Simpson on the Simpsons talking to the Buddhists about it, or different areas of life, whenever I heard about it, there was something that just felt so true about it to me. So I really, really loved that when I started doing more and more mediumship readings. It wasn't every reading, but every once in a while there would be something pop up about a past life, whether it was a past loved one that I was connecting my sitter to in a reading, and they were talking about a past life connection they had with them. Or it was even one of their spirit guides would talk about, the person I was reading for, an issue they're dealing with in this life stems from a past life. And while I don't think connecting to our past lives is the solution to all of our lives' problems, I do think it can be incredibly helpful to understand ourselves and sort of our journey as a soul. And that's really when I talk to those in spirit, when I even talk to my dad about it now, who would have never believed in it when he was alive, but they have such a greater perspective in the spirit world. He and so many others in spirit talk about it as the journey of the soul, how this body is one stop on that journey, but we are so much greater than that. And when we look at the idea of us incarnating here in these bodies, in this life, it's because we love the experience that this life has to offer. It does not mean that we love all the pain and the suffering and the really crappy stuff in this life while we're here. But when we get to the other side, we realize how much growth and expansion and how much experience we have gained through this life. Why wouldn't we want to do that again? Right? It's almost like when you play a video game and it's really hard, but you enjoy the process because you learn something from it. You had fun. Even if you didn't learn something, you had fun. That's kind of what this life is like. And going into our past lives, it can really help give us a little bit more security in knowing that life is so much more than just this life. But it can also help give an incredible amount of healing where, that issue that's been popping up throughout your life, it's here and coming up in this life. Because yes, oftentimes it has a past life connection, But that karmic tie, that karmic bond that's bringing it up again, wouldn't be happening in this life if you weren't ready to move through it and heal it in this life. And that's one of my favorite parts when I do a past life regression with somebody. I do it on Zoom. They don't need to be in the room with me. I am taking into a deep meditative journey where they get to see their past lives for themselves. They get to put their feet on the ground in that life and see who they were connected with, see the people in this life that have shown up in them with life after life, and understand sort of the things that are coming up for them in their life. Not everything, but many of the things have happened in past lives and they're coming up again in this life because you are ready to move through them. You are ready to heal them.
I love that. Have you ever done a past life reading and you realize that that individual or that being had a past life on a different planet? Or has it always kind of been
Ooh,
like Earth based lives?
that's interesting. So I would say most of the work I do, it has been on this planet. However, knowing we live in a quantum universe, there are so many different sort of dimensions that life on this earth can happen. I wouldn't be surprised if life on different planets, different universes, different places doesn't come up for people. But I would say generally it tends to be more on what we would recognize as Earth. But it definitely we have so many options of where we incarnate, what we do. So it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, maybe it's presented to you and or, your client in a way that they can understand in like earthly terms too, right? So
Well, whenever I do a session, we're not setting an intention to connect with a particular life or a particular theme. We're opening up to whatever is the most helpful for you in this life. And so that could be a life from long ago. That could be, your most recent past life. It could be one that's even more of a, happening simultaneously that we can't quite understand, but can happen, right? And for me, having that intention of whatever is helpful for you to understand in this life is the most important part, because I'm not doing past life regressions for fun to say, oh, I was this celebrity or I was this queen or I did this amazing thing. It's not for an ego boost.
yeah. Yeah, for
It's
sure.
it's to help actually heal and understand what is coming up in our lives that we're ready to move through. And sometimes, that certain fears that have sort of followed us into a life that we don't quite understand from this life, like seeing it from a past life perspective suddenly gives us that perspective to say, oh, okay, I don't need to hold on to this anymore. I get it. I get why I felt this way. Now I know that I don't need to carry it anymore. Right. And that's one of the most common things that I find is healing in relationships, healing in situations, seeing that greater perspective than just that you are able to see from this body, which can be incredibly healing.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there a difference between like your past life regressions and say an Akashic record reading? Or are they pretty similar?
So the Akashic records can absolutely connect in with past lives. I would say one of the biggest differences is when I'm doing a past life regression is whoever I'm regressing gets to see it for themselves. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it. I've done past life readings where I'm giving the past life, or even an Akashic record reading, right? Where I'm receiving the info and giving it to whoever I'm reading for. And there is certainly lots of value in that. But I know for me, with my development of really getting to connect with my dad, getting to feel him and eventually see him and, have this connection where I know beyond a doubt that he's around, not just living on, but he is near and involved in our lives and all of that. That personal experience to me is invaluable. And so that's why I love doing past life regressions is I'm not just saying, hey, this is what I'm picking up on you. Does that make sense? Right. It's I'm helping them to see it for themselves. And I think that would be the biggest difference between doing a past life reading or an Akashic Records reading, where you can absolutely see past life information, but you're delivering it, versus when you're regressing someone, they get to experience it for themselves, which I think can be really, really powerful.
So it's almost like a meditation that you put your client in, and they have this visual journey of what you're delivering in a way, but you're like delivering it in like, I've never done one. So I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And so that person, it's almost like, I don't know, what just came to mind is like, it's almost like they're watching a movie of their past life versus just
Yes,
hearing about it.
absolutely. And I would say one of the biggest things, it's just like when we connect with spirit or receive intuitive messages, or even when we're dreaming, everyone's going to experience it in a different way. So when I bring sort of somebody that I'm regressing into that progressive place where we want to connect with a past life, they might be somebody who sees every single detail. They might look down and see their feet as different feet. They might look at their body and see different clothes. They might, even be able to look at their reflection and see all of what they looked like in that life or who they're around. But somebody also might not see it. They might just feel the energy and feel what's going on, or even they might just know. And one thing when I'm doing a regression is a last question as we go along. And I say, you don't want to think about it. As soon as the thinking mind comes in, just like when we're doing mediumship, we don't want to be thinking, right? That's going to block what we're receiving. So when I ask a question like, how old are you? Or what do they call you? Or who are you with? Just letting that answer come out for a lot of people, especially if they don't see it, that knowing will come out really easily if they just know the answer.
Mm.
And I find that comes up a lot. This isn't always the case in a regression, but oftentimes when we're in a past life, whoever is around you, I'll get the person to look into their eyes, and it might be something they see, it might just be a knowing, but the idea is connecting with the soul of the people around you in that past life and noticing if you recognize them. And for most people, this is just a knowing. It's not as if they see someone in that past life and they're like, oh, it looks exactly like my sister in this life, right? Not how it works. You might see it and know who they are, but it's often that soul recognition of, this is my dad in a past life and he was my son, right? And I just recognize his soul. And I know that we have chosen to reincarnate again in this life because it was a beneficial connection for each other in the past. It's a beneficial connection in this life. And that's one thing I love. You know, past life regression is an amazing way to connect with your past lives, but we can connect with the energy of our past lives outside of regression too. In dreams, I think is one of the most common ways people do this and they don't even realize. So, Holly, I'm interested if you've experienced this where you're dreaming and there's someone else in your dream, whether you see them or feel them or not, but you just know who they are, right? I know this has come up a lot in my dreams where, I don't even see the other person in my dream, but it's like, oh, that's my friend. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
recognize the energy of their soul right away, right? Or I'm dreaming and I don't even see my husband in it with me, but I just know he's there, right? To me, that is such a signifier of that soul recognition, which means you have had past lives before. You're able to recognize the soul, the energy of that person without even needing to see them in this life, in another life. And so, if for those who are listening, if you've had dreams like that, where you don't even need to see the person in the dreams, for you just know who's there with you, whether it's a past loved one or somebody who's living, to me, those are the people that you have had a past life connection with. And not everybody in your life you will have had a past life connection with. I know when I've done my own regressions, I've had life after life with my husband, with my dad, with, friends. But my mom and my sister aren't ones that I don't think I've ever had past lives with either of them. So I've never had that experience where I'm dreaming and they show up and I don't even need to see them, but I know who they are. But I have with my dad, I have with my husband. And to me, that's one of the easiest ways that we probably don't even realize we're connecting with past life memories is when they show up in our dreams and we just recognize their souls. It works the same in a past life regression, but dreams are a beautiful way to just remind us who we truly are connected with outside of this life.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I find that that happens to me like every night. I'm dreaming, and pretty much everybody are people that like their energies, their I wouldn't say people, but their energies, their being is familiar. And I also think, in addition to past life connections, I think that when we have that in the dream world, it can also be other souls that we're connecting with on different dimensions and doing work in different dimensions, and maybe not incarnated together in this life, and maybe never have even been incarnated in a physical form in a past life, but we have that connection, that familiar connection. And we know that we're like, in a way, I almost want to say like a team, because there's different, I believe that there's different soul purposes that we have in this life as well as in other dimensions, and they happen simultaneously. And so those connections can come from those other dimensions and realms as well.
Absolutely. The soul recognition is
Mm-hmm.
coming from an increased connection from something. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. That's why I love dreams so much too, is because, at some point, everybody has dreamt. People do go through phases of their dreaming cycle where they don't dream as much or they don't remember their dreams. But almost everybody has had dreams, and everybody does dream whether they remembered or not. And so for me, it's such a beautiful doorway into connection with that energy and what the infinite could be for them, what that experience is for them.
Totally. Absolutely. And I'm such a believer. A lot of people will talk about when spirits visit us in our dreams. And I'm always like, we're the ones visiting them, right? We're leaving the physical and going to the non physical. And we can go to many different realms, many different dimensions in our dreams, right? But if you've ever had a past loved one show up in your dream, I want to suggest that it's not them visiting you, it's you visiting them.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Definitely. Because they're always around. Like, I'm just feeling into like my dreams, and it's just like I know that they're there. And when I become lucid, then I'll be like, "Oh, hey, like let's chat." And they're just like, "It was about time you asked." Cuz like I'm there visiting them. I'm in like the spirit world. So, I like that reframe.
And I find that's the same whether we're dreaming or whether we're in the non-dreaming awake state. I find those in spirit are always around and supporting us and waiting when we're ready and open to connect with them. Right. And it might be after the passing of a close loved one. It might be, a particular traumatic life event. It could just be the timing is right, right? But I often find just because we don't sense them or know they're around in this moment doesn't mean they are. They are. They're often just waiting for the time when we're ready to start connecting more and more.
Totally, totally. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You have shared so much. I honestly would keep talking, but I feel like we should just let people digest what you shared so far. So maybe we'll have to have you come back. But in the meantime, can you share how people can get in touch with you? Is there some offering you want to share with them? I know I think you have like a 3 module or 3 video intuitive program, a free one that.
Yeah, so I have a completely free intuition training. It's going to take you through sort of opening up those intuitive senses, allowing yourself to become sensitive again. You can realize all that you're already picking up on that you blocked out. So that free training is available on the mediumschool.com. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube. I do lots of meditations, all at the Medium School. And you can also find my book, 11 Lessons from My Dead Dad, How I Learned to Connect with My Past Loved Ones and How You Can Too. Is available worldwide on Amazon. And I laugh when I say the title because my dad gave me that title. I never, death can be so incredibly life changing for so many people. And I know it was for me. And the idea that it wasn't the end for my dad changed everything in my life. And the idea that I can talk about my dead dad in such a happy, positive way, I never would have thought I was there. And so I'm honored to have written this book, and it's really a guide if there's a particular past loved one that someone wants to connect with, that you want to connect with. This is a step-by-step book to help you start opening up that connection and know for yourself that the passing of your loved one wasn't the end. So available worldwide on Amazon. I'm really honored to bring through my dad and my spirit guides knowledge through that book.
Oh, I love it. I'll put all the links in the show notes too, so people can just like click and find you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Holly. Such a pleasure.